Welcome to our first online event. Welcome to our series, Lindsay. There's a lot of people, Alex. There's a lot of us.
Yeah, we're now at 42 people and it's
Yes.
quarter past, so I guess it's time to get started.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. I can see there's a lot of people writing on the chat. I'm sorry that I couldn't really keep up. And then right now, I can present to you guys Joachim from Elite Game Developers, who's going to be sharing some insights and tips on how to publish your first game project. So I think Joachim's already with us. Joachim?
Hey, thanks, Eliana. It's nice to finally do this. We talked about this for a while now with Eliana, that I would come and talk to you guys. So it's a big pleasure to talk today about like how to finance your first game as a game developer. So introduction on myself. I'm Joachim Akre. I'm the founder and CEO of Elite Game Developers, which is basically a game startup school, an online school for understanding how you should approach building a gaming startup. I started this last year. My background in gaming is that I actually founded a company 15 years ago called Iron Star Helsinki, which was doing virtual worlds games for Nokia phones. So you can imagine it wasn't the kind of like the most ideal platform to do any kind of games, because there was no online connectivity back in the days, really. So you had 2G. People were barely getting, downloading our games. It was a struggle, but we eventually started doing other kind of games. We did Facebook games, went profitable for a while until Facebook started closing down all their viral feeds for like friend requests, whatnot. So we couldn't grow our games and we ended up shutting down the company. I went to Supercell to help on the analytics side for a year. That was when they were making the Gunshine game. And then when Clash of Clans and Heyday came out, I decided I wanted to do another company, and then started Next Games in 2013 with 4 other people. And we IPO'd into the Helsinki Stock Exchange in 2017. It was a wild ride. I wanted to do something else. Last year I left to start Elite Game Developers. I wanted to get back into like the root, like the early stage. And one idea there was that I was seeing a lot of developers, especially here in Helsinki area, having a lot of problems on like, what do you need to do to actually get going? And of course, the first problem is that how far are you from paying a salary for yourself from your games? Sort of like really, like, of course you have a beautiful game idea, but like how long will it take for you to actually pay your own salaries? And one way to get started is definitely that people bootstrap their way through. But also the topic of today is like, how do you find external funding for your game? So the options for gaming really are crowdfunding. Most of you probably know what this means. It's the Kickstarters, the Indiegogos. It's a model where the consumers basically hand over money to you for the promise of shipping a game that you're pitching to them on the website, and you're offering some special gratitude, some items for these people who put the money in. It's a very community-driven approach. I myself haven't had an experience in this field, but it definitely is something that especially the indie developers have been utilizing a lot and have raised a lot of money. A lot of companies in Finland have done it as well. And then you have the publisher model of you as a developer going to meet publishers. Now we don't have the Gamescom conferences anymore, so it's a lot difficult to meet them, but the model still exists. The publishers are still looking for developers. There is outreach there. So in this model, you have publishers who know how they can add, a certain aspect to your game and make it even bigger. But they're looking at a lot of ideas out there, and they can really like support only you know, a dozen games per year max, and you're still like looking at like what are your options there. It's still limited. Then you have like, especially on mobile games where you are running games with metrics, you can see that you're getting, you know, a lot of users in for a very cheap cost on Facebook ads, whatnot. So you can take a loan from these companies, basically a user acquisition credit. Like there's Pollen VC, Tilting Point does this, I believe, in one way, and then a UK company called Sugar is now starting, who are also doing this kind of like money upfront for basically like the revenue that you're going to be making. But today, the topic that I wanted to talk about to you guys is venture capital and a model of equity investing, where an investor gets a piece of your company for exchange for money. And I urge you guys to really like start like thinking about this model, even though you're not like super curious about like how this works. But I believe like understanding venture capital can also unlock a lot about the secrets of how do you actually get to pay a salary in making games as well, when you start to understand how a venture capitalist thinks. So the crude fact is that there's like, you know, 1 out of 100 pitches that investors here will get funded. And this is totally the case that I've been talking to a lot of people who constantly take pitches, and it's kind of like the VCs own that market. So they definitely can say which companies will get funded, but they have also had problems previously where they bet money on games that really didn't have a return in the end of the day. So there's a lot more like these wise VCs coming up now in gaming. I'm going to talk about this in a bit. But first off, I want to show this picture about hockey. So what does hockey have to do with venture capital in gaming? So I would say the analogy here is that in Finland, you have 75,000 youngsters who are playing hockey, who want to get into NHL one day and be drafted into a club. It's a similar thing with gaming, actually. Game developers, there's a long tail of small gaming startups everywhere, but only this kind of like small fraction get funding. So how do you actually get to go to this kind of route, and how do you get there to get the money from the VC? So this is kind of like my timeline of how I approached like being interested about gaming. So I started making games when I was 11 years old with like Amiga 500 or something, and then I actually sold my first software when I was a 15-year-old in high school, and then started my first company as an 18-year-old. We were doing like some retail in Vaasa, where I'm from originally. Then started a gaming career as a programmer in 2000 in Kuopio for a mobile games company that was doing like black and white mobile phone WAP games. I graduated eventually from the university when I was 25, and I started my first game startup, Iron Star Helsinki, when I was 27. So actually at that stage was the first time I encountered venture capital as something that, okay, what is this? Is it like, you know, I go to the bank and ask for money? Is it the same kind of situation? Well, it wasn't that. Then I understand that there's something called the pitch deck, which you need to create, where you start like outlining your business to these people who might give you money. And I was doing the best I could. I remember being in London, meeting a huge, like this, you know, you go to an office where everything is like glass walls. The venture capital partners look like they just came from Miami, like with suits. And then I was there pitching, and one of the investors actually walked out of the room in the middle of my pitch. And I like, for several years, I was thinking like, why did that happen? And it was sort of like, of course, there was a lot of arrogance involved as well from the VC side, no doubt about that. But it was sort of like, I hadn't at all prepared for like what they were waiting from me as a founder, as an entrepreneur coming to get their money. And eventually I started learning these. Of course, like I mentioned there, that my first company failed. I was 32 then. Then I went to Supercell to do analytics for a year before I started my next company. And then we actually raised 12 million for Next Games as VC money before we did the public offering in the Helsinki First North. So it was kind of like a learning curve there that I was constantly thinking about, like, what is this? But the alignment happened when I started to think about like, how are actually like successful companies built? They build a game which makes money, and that's the first thing. But there's also other stuff that's involved. So like, first off, like understanding what VC is really important. Here's a list of sort of the ones that I kind of quickly through like just Googling, like came up with the people who are investing in games who I know of. So most of these companies invest into Nordic companies. Some of them are Finnish, some of them for US, UK, Germany. And you guys have in Sweden at least Creandum, Atomico, there's a few others who are super active. North Zone, who else? I don't recall right now, but like there's more and more coming. And Transcend, who is here on the list, they were the latest ones to show up with a I think $60 million fund to invest. But yeah, what is venture capital? So they are typically funds who are investing money out of other people's money from this fund. So let's take an example from the VC's perspective. This is like an example firm called Adventure VC. I haven't met an Adventure VC, but this is just what I came up today. But like, let's say they have a $50 million fund, which they got from wealthy individuals who put money here. Like they collected it maybe from other games companies. That's what I've heard recently, that a lot of like the bigger companies have started putting money into VC funds. So the investing for this kind of like 50 million for Adventure VC would be that they want to invest in the early stage, where it's mostly the team, a prototype, or a bit further, like a prototype that is already in the App Store or it's launched on Steam, and there's some numbers to look at already, and they're typically investing $500,000 to $2 million. So what is the business that they're in? So Adventure VC, they would have like two general partners who are allocating the money from the fund, and they've raised 50 million from limited partners who are the people who put the money into the fund. And the general partners, they take an annual management fee, which is usually a few percentage for salaries, for legal, for travel, all sorts of expenses to actually run this as a company. So how do they make money? Well, they need to have an exit at some point where the equity that they have in your startup gets sold to somebody else, or there's a stock exchange listing happening where the public is buying the shares. So they need to have a return to the fund eventually. So let's say the VC invests $500,000 into a startup. They get 20% of the company as equity. And this is very like, let's say a team who was at Rovio or King leaves and they start a company. This is like something that I've seen a lot lately, that $500,000 and you need to give out 20%. But that really means that you have a credible team, a really like great idea, and you can like immediately start executing on that. So let's say this kind of like moment happens that a startup is then sold for like $500 million, 400 million, 2 years later after the investment. So out of that, the VC, if they still own 20%, it means that they get 80 million back to the fund. So the profit there, so the fund is now returned. It's a term that is being used so that all the limited partners get their money back. And the 30 million that is left over is profit that they share, that the general partners share for themselves. So in this kind of thing called carried interest fee, which then again is another 20% out of the whole profit. So the people, the VCs themselves make money this way, the limited partners get the 80%. So there's a dynamic there that you need to take into consideration how this works. So does this really sound easy? So what happens is that the VCs typically do 40 to 60 investments from this kind of one fund. If they have 50 million in the fund, they're putting in 500,000 to 2 million. They spread it out into an average of 50 companies in the lifetime. So, but what happens is that 2 or rarely even 3 companies can make hundreds of millions. And there's several companies that are going to make a few million or tens of millions, but then a large portion of these investments will still fail. And what does that mean? And why are we looking at this from the VC's perspective? Because I think the key here is to understand the VC's business, that they're going after a big return. They're not, in a sense, like wanting you to only pay the salaries for yourself, but rather to grow a company into something huge. So that's where you need to start thinking about, like, what is a VC backable games company? Like, if you go and talk to investors, they might be taking a pitch, but then they, like what happened to me 15 years ago when I was pitching in London at this big VC firm, was that the partner just walked out. That's like a very kind of polarized example, but it was more on my kind of part of showing up and not really having done my homework. So they are really going after these big outcomes, a lot of money that they want to see coming back to the fund, to return the fund, and then to make a profit. So they will do what they can to help you succeed if they invest, for sure. They will give you all the contacts they have. Like I showed the list there of the gaming VCs, all of those people on that list, they're really connected in the industry as well. So they can help you hire your team, like meet up with other partners, things like that. So there's a lot of keys to success when you have good VCs on board. But you need to think about this as not alone. So it is a marriage that is like even more kind of permanent than any other marriage you could think of. They will be with you until the end, when there is a moment where the company is sold or somebody else is buying your shares. So in a sense, it is more permanent than any of the other options that are available out there. So let's take an example case. Here's a company that could be funded by VCs. So let's say they have 550,000 from VCs last year. And how did all this happen? The first steps that they took was, part of the team left their previous jobs, and part of them were still working at the company when these first steps were taken. And the CEO reached out to angel investors who are a certain, like these individuals who are also putting money into company, like with a stake of equity coming to them, let's say like 5% or 2.5% for 50,000 or 25,000. So much smaller, who are then going to be doing more work with you. And they built a prototype at the same time for the game in their spare time. And then finally they started pitching to VCs after they've met these angel investors and practiced their pitch and had a lot of discussions and learned from those discussions. They started to approach the first VCs, and they got one VC interested after seeing the prototype. And what then happens is that if there's a VC who wants to invest, they will give you a term sheet, which is like it's like a letter of intent of an investment will happen if these terms are met. And they got the term sheet and they signed it pretty quickly. They didn't even have a corporate entity registered when they raised the money. So then when the papers were signed, they went and registered the Finnish osakeyhtiö, which is the limited liabilities company. And a few months later, the rest of the team members quit their previous jobs. And here's like a timeline of 6 months of how it went, that the founders had the idea for the company. They created a prototype on their spare time, pitched to angels. Then when the pitch was perfect, they met the VCs, they got the term sheet signed, and they finally like got into an office, because this was in the days when they still had offices, and the money arrived in their bank and they could start working as a company. But yeah, like you might just ask this question, but I just want to fund my game and get on with it. So why is this like so hard? Why is it so complicated? Well, you need to understand the VC model first. It's not the easiest, like here's money and hope everything works out. Like, you need to understand this, because it will make you better at understanding the gaming startups as well that are getting funded. What is the underlying reason that they're getting money? Why aren't other people getting money? And it's more likely that you can make actually a business that starts paying salaries if there is, you know, some kind of growth happening, that you can actually propel something that you're aligned with the VCs on. And I think like all of you guys, hopefully you're going to stick around in the game industry. It's the best place to be. And since you're going to be making so many games in your career, different kind of games, different kind of funding models, where it makes sense to, you know, take user acquisition credit. Here it makes sense to take the publisher money, and here it makes sense to take venture capital money. So it's a benefit to start learning how these work. So like I have a blog under elitegamedevelopers.com where I have like dozens of articles outlining reasons of where investors will say no to you. So I don't really have time to cover all the reasons, because it's like, you know, a list of dozens of things that really need to be taken into consideration. So I hope you have time to go and check this out. The website is elitegamedevelopers.com, and happy to take a lot of questions now.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks so much. I actually gonna ask, I did that all the time, and I think it was really cool, even though it's on Zoom, if you can just clap for Jochen as a thank you for the presentation. You have to unmute your mic.
Everybody. First time on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Some people clapped with the emoticon. Yeah, that's with their reaction. That's good. As Jochen said, feel free to ask questions. So you can just maybe raise your hand and ask with the microphone if you want to, or you just write in the chat and then I can let him know, or just direct to him.
Just one sort of question that I guess pops in, like just if you start from just not knowing any, you know, you're completely out of this venture capitalist world and things.
Yeah.
Like how do you make the first step of like what are the sources or even the steps of like to reach out to these people? Like, is it just send an email to their public, you know, email address saying, hey, I have a thing, can we talk?
Yeah, because they're all on LinkedIn, so that's a place it's kind of like the common place to start outreaching to them if you don't have their email. But it's really like definitely that would be the last place to start in a sense. There's so much information online. You can ask other people who are like gone through the process of raising money. So ask them first. Check out my blog. I have a lot of stuff there. Since there's so many problems that you're going to be facing if you don't really know what it means to raise money from venture capital money, especially. It's so different from thinking about crowdfunding, for instance.
And how much would you say when you pitch a venture capitalist, are they, because like in my mind it seems like you're pitching to people maybe not so invested in the creative aspect of the thing, like it's all about the money, or is it like?
Well, I think there's a balance there, that it's always about like what is the kind of like the market need, and what is something that is definitely underutilized. And that's why the prototypes are so important. Like I gave the example that if you have a prototype and you can approach one of these Play Ventures or somebody who have worked in gaming, like Play Ventures has people who worked at King, so they definitely know if there's something unique here, and if the team knows what they're talking about, and that okay, if we give them $500,000, like how are they going to spend it? They need to know, the entrepreneur needs to know how he's going to spend it, so the investor won't tell him. So there won't be that kind of, there will be an acceptance there of, for sure, you don't know everything, game making really well, but you need to know kind of like the fundamentals of the business at least. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question here from the chat from Tom. Why would one choose VC over publisher? And what are the defining differences and advantages?
Yeah, good question. Publisher money is always spent on one game. And in a sense, like, publisher model is really great if you already can fund your game development. There's a lot of like options out there, and most of the publisher models nowadays are more towards like, we help with marketing, but we won't fund development of the game. That there's not that many models like that. And also the problem with that model nowadays is that since the publishers don't want to take the risk unless the game is kind of ready already. So the venture capitalist will take risk on everything. They will they will take risk that the company will work, all the games in the future will work, but the publisher will most likely see that the game is ready, let's fund the marketing and take a slice out of that. So I don't, at least in mobile, in PC, I haven't bumped into too many deals nowadays where the, like, it's very like a lucrative model for the company to actually like get funded by a publisher for like several hundreds of thousands before the game is ready. So I guess that is the main difference there. It's very hard to justify a publisher putting money into a company where the game isn't ready.
Tom, just write if you have a follow-up question to his answer. And then I also have another question here in the chat from Patrick. Do you need to have a clear budget to propose when you reach out or present to a VC or publisher?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have on my website actually a spreadsheet template, so you can find it there. It's like a cash flow where you can look at how the salaries go and what other kind of expenses you need to take into consideration for funding a games company.
Oh, great. Let's just going to type here. Is it elitegamedevelopers.com?
Yeah.
So just maybe share the link so they can access. Yes. Oh, thank you. David was quicker. He actually shared. I think David is going through your blog, reading all the 10 reasons why investors say no. He's already reading it.
They do say no a lot. So
you had to make one for. Is it also the same for publishers? You think is it the same reasons?
Yeah, I have a podcast as well. I don't know if anybody has listened to it. I talked to GameSeer, who is from Switzerland. They do a lot of PC game publishing, well, basically project financing. And he said that he has like 2,000 people that are trying to reach out to him at the moment. And he can only fund like 10 companies. So the rate and the ratio that you get funding is super hard. In all the cases, I think you still need to have a really good, compelling pitch and an idea. The podcast is called Elite Game Developers, so you can find it on Spotify and similar places.
Yeah, and I guess also it's not every company that reach out, they actually ready for investment. I mean, I think also there's, as you were talking, there's also some people, because they don't really understand much the difference of the different types of investments. There's some companies are not investment ready, but they approach anyway, thinking they're getting confused about maybe instead of trying to find a publisher, but they just try to go for investment in the company as the first thing. I think that is something, will VC generally be okay with partnering up with a publisher as well? As a question from the chat.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It really depends on like if you have a really, like if the game is really good and you feel that, you know, you can start doing marketing for the game on your own, then you could leverage the money from the VCs to hire marketing people who can help you. And then you can take something like the user acquisition credit or, you know, other kind of like money that doesn't take equity from your company for marketing purposes. And there you can of course like think about like, should we still have a publisher for this game? Because it makes more sense for us to you know, put it through some kind of other company who will take care of the marketing. But in a sense, like VC is more interested in companies who can do the distribution of the game on their own.
Okay, thanks. There's another one here from Oliver. Is there a certain size of project that is typically more attractive to VCs? Is there a rule of thumb about the minimum or maximum size, or does it differ a lot based on the VC?
It really is based on like what is common in the market. Like you have a valuation for a company. Like I was giving the example of here's 500,000 for 20%. So that means that the company is worth 2.5 million. So in a sense, like that is like a really experienced team starting a company, very attractive company for the investors because the risks are much lower compared to a company which was founded by people who don't have all that experience, you know, that they're still learning, they're so junior, whatnot. No offense, but then the VC will, you know, say that, hey, this is like too early for us. You guys are early, meaning go and learn a bit more. But that's how they operate, because it's again like they have hundreds of people who are knocking on their door and they're gonna pick only a few of them.
Yes, so basically the rule of thumb would be more about the competence and experience of the company, the team, than necessarily the size.
Yeah, it is. It's more like that. Of course, there's these stories that somebody just went and raised angel money. Maybe they got like 100,000 of angel investors' money. But the problem there is that how long will that money last? Like if you need to have a team who are kind of expecting to get some money as a salary, how long can you stretch 100,000, for instance, dollars or euros? And then like, where does it lead you? Does it lead to a point where you eventually need to go and ask the investors for more money and then more and more? So rather than doing these kind of like small chunks of money where you constantly need to give out percentages of your company away, which is super like bad. It's going to be bad for future investors because they see that the entrepreneur only owns like 20% of the company anymore. So the company is mostly owned by investors, and that's not a good place for motivation for the founders. And all. So yeah, it's tricky. Don't raise too much, but rather like optimize to raise when you know that you can actually use the money in a very effective way.
That actually leads very well to the next question, which is, I think you meant VCs, do they usually include buyback options for the shares held by the VC in the contract?
No, that doesn't usually happen. Of course, you can negotiate that later on, but like, no, I have never seen anything like that in the contracts that the entrepreneur could buy back the shares.
I have a question as well myself. It's just more related to this time of Corona crisis, of course. You know, I was reading that normally companies have a runaway of 6 months, like small companies and startups, and then they rely so much of going to events to pitch the, you know, the game, and then as well to meet investors and so on to pitch and try to get funded. Do you have any practical tips to, or research a bit, or how is it going on right now? Like that the events have been mainly canceled and there aren't many platforms for people to pitch right now?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think the problem isn't that the investors wouldn't want to meet people. I think even without the events, you can still go on LinkedIn and send them a message, and they will most likely reply if you're, you know, because they want to see constantly new deals, new possibilities and places to invest. But the problem with the coronavirus is, I think, is that in a few, like at the end of the year, like the VCs will start running out of money, and they can't. There's an issue in the market that they can't really raise now because everybody's so panicking. The limited partners especially. So that's what I heard now, is that like at the end of the year it could be coming tricky. So what I've been advising for people now is to actually raise like a bigger amount now that you can survive for maybe 24 months, like 2 years with that funding, so that you can get through this kind of nuclear winter that we are having.
Nuclear winter is a good name for a game. A survival game. Well, thank you. Yeah, I guess it makes sense. A lot of people as well are just so used to actually get maybe prepared for a year and do pitch training and so on, consultants to actually go there and nail it. And it's a bit sad that now, yeah, it won't happen. But of course, they can still reach out to their contacts online, and they should probably do it instead of just trying to wait for the next event and run out of money before that happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are getting close to the end, and then I guess once again I just want to say thank you to Joachim, and maybe now we can work out with the clap. Can we try to do that? I thought it was really cool when they did that with me. So if you unmute your mic and just clap, I thought it was really cool. And then thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and then see you guys around. See you on the next event.